Hello, it's me, Alex Hasler, and today I'm here to talk to you about the hard-boiled crime fiction. What is that, you may ask? Well, according to Britannica, hard-boiled fiction is a tough, unsentimental style of crime writing originating from the United States, which brought a new tone of earthy realism or naturalism to the field of detective fiction. It usually used graphic sex and violence, grimy urban settings, and slang throughout the dialogue. Hard-boiled crime fiction did away with many of the conventions of classic detective fiction, especially that of the clean resolution. In hard-boiled detective fiction, even after the crime is solved, you cannot escape the corrupt world in which the crime took place. This applies to the characters within the story and the readers themselves. I mean, think about it. Hard-boiled stories took off, particularly in serialized magazines and such, during the 1920s and 30s. So let's just think for a second. What was happening then? Ah, yeah. Cool and fun things like prohibition, banning of alcohol, and big boom of crime, and the Great Depression. This bleakness then went on to inspire the film noir movement in the 1940s and 50s, during a similar bleak time. And what was going on then? Oh, that's right, the aftermath of the Second World War. So, and then after those conventions of film noir became embedded in cinema, which was of course largely inspired by hard-boiled fiction, and they go on to continue inspiring media today, particularly in the aptly named neo-noir genre. So, the core of our discussion today revolves around a key question. Does the hard-boiled narrative show us a depraved and amoral world, or does it show us a world being made right? And I'll be primarily using the books The Big Sleep and The Monkey's Mask from Raymond Chandler and Dorothy Porter respectively to discuss this point. As I said, mostly, I will bring in anything else if I feel like it. Well, on to the point, I have to ask another question. Are these concepts mutually exclusive? No, not necessarily at all. You can display a harsh, corrupt, and broken down world that can still be made right. But in most hard-boiled narratives, at least from what I've personally consumed, this world isn't being made right. The world is an almost unchangeable force, and the few good people are just broken down and corrupted by the systems around them. Cynicism consumes all, good cannot prevail, even if the hero, usually an anti-hero, succeeds. The ever-present bleakness of reality lies in its unchangeability. At least that's the core of many of these stories. Art, for the most part, comes as a reflection of the artist's reality, and the pioneers of the hard-boiled subgenre, whether they liked or disliked classic detective fiction, were inspired to write crime stories which reflect their current, American, reality. Rampant crime on the streets, with deep-rooted corruption taking hold of the law. And here is a quote from the chapter about hard-boiled fiction in the 20th-Century Crime Fiction, about page 68. Whereas the Gold Age writers can be said to have created a detective fiction that encodes the socio-political anxieties of their time, hard-boiled writers addressed the problems of their society explicitly. These stories weren't comforting. And that's, not saying the classics were never dark, but primarily they were escapist, contained to an idealized community with a charming, intelligent lead. They were windows into realities the readers most likely weren't from, like a quaint neighborhood, rich people, that kind of stuff. But the hard-boiled stories were a window into the grimy world the average person could already catch a glimpse of in their daily life, living in the city. A way to explore this world without endangering oneself, particularly through, as I mentioned, the weekly serials where you catch up on each episode, essentially, like a TV show that you read on the public transport back from work. So bringing in the stories, hard-boiled narratives excel at presenting an amoral world, in part due to their formally serialized nature, as I mentioned. Each story, even if it's completely standalone, has the potential to function as simply another depressing chapter in our investigator's life. The world proves yet again how terrible it is, and that they're first forced to move on. This is how I felt about The Monkey's Mask's ending. An ending that I felt somewhat dissatisfied with, mostly because it kind of just ends. But how it concludes is in line with the hard-boiled subgenre. Jill solves the mystery, but can't do anything when it comes to proper justice. She's left possibly even more hurt than she was before. Just another chapter of her life in a miserable world. Akin to the serialization of Marlowe's mystery, which was initially told in serials prior to The Big Sleep's novelization, like compiling it all together. Whether the investigator is a protagonist across a whole series or not, and just within a single story, We can understand the repetitive, crushing reality they face day after day, mystery after mystery. Solving the case doesn't have to be satisfying, yet even a dissatisfying ending can be conclusive or in line with the world and the narrative. My favourite example of this being in David Fincher's Seven. It's not happy, it's beyond grim, yet it is exactly what the movie has established and was even mostly expected by one of the two protagonists. Again though, not all detective narratives, hard-boiled and hard-boiled inspired or not, follow these trends as closely as others. Our heroes, anti-heroes, can make change, they can succeed, they can come out on top without the infection eating away at society, taking over. And our whodunit and other classic detective stories don't need a positive tone or happy ending either. The genre conventions can be bent, broken, twisted, inversed, and more. Everything comes down to the type of story you want to make or engage in, and the execution of the idea at its core. So while the hard-boiled narrative conventionally shows us a depraved and corrupted world, which usually cannot be changed, it is possible for some stories to present ways to help society heal. Though many, broken down by the cynicism of the world within and beyond their pages, tell us good deeds cannot solve a broken society. I believe it's up to you, the audience, to try and make that change and prove that a ruined society doesn't have to stay ruined. Like, even... story it tells. So in conclusion, while The Hardboiled is an honest window into the darker sides of our amoral world, rather than a showcase of a world being made right, it doesn't mean we have to fall into the depraved world of the protagonists. Maybe no good deeds go unpunished, but that shouldn't discourage us, as the readers, to learn from the horrors of our world, to make it better. Even if the hard-boiled detective is left broken again and again, the world may not be made right, but we can make it right by pushing back against the corruption of the system, rather than continuing to live as is.
Where you gonna be?
Around. I'll be around. Ernest Hemingway once wrote, "The world is a fine place and worth fighting for." I agree with the second part.